I used to work as a custodian at an elementary school for almost 6 years, and I was usually on the overnight shift. I would clock in around 9 at night and stay until right before the sun came up when the buses started pulling in. At first, I actually liked the job. I didn't have to deal with the kids running down the hallways, teachers complaining about stuff, or anyone really. The quiet didn't bother me, and I liked being left alone to do my work. But as time went on, I started to notice how different the school felt at night compared to during the day. It wasn't just quiet, it felt hollow. Like the building had exhaled all its life the moment the last person left. The hallways that were so noisy and chaotic during school hours became these long, empty tunnels that seemed to stretch forever under the fluorescent lights. Let me tell you about 3 experiences I had during those years. Experiences that made me realize that some buildings don't completely empty out when everyone goes home. Story 1: The pool. The worst part of my route was always the natatorium. That's what they called the pool building. It was connected to the main school by a long hallway, but it felt like a completely separate structure. You could tell it had been added on years after the original building was constructed. Everything about it was different. Colder. More echo-y. Less maintained. The pool itself was Olympic-sized, with bleachers along one side and a viewing window from the hallway. During the day, it was full of kids for swim class and after-school practice. But at night, the water was perfectly still, and the whole building took on this strange, heavy atmosphere that I can't quite describe. I had to clean the pool area twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. It was always saved for last on my route because I hated it. The combination of chlorine smell, humidity, and the echoing acoustics made me feel uncomfortable from the moment I opened the door. The routine was simple. Empty the trash cans in the locker rooms, mop the deck around the pool, wipe down the bleachers, and make sure all the equipment was put away properly. It usually took about 45 minutes if I didn't rush. One Tuesday night in October, I remember because Halloween decorations were still up in the main school, I entered the natatorium around 2:30 a.m. I flipped on the lights and the fluorescent panels buzzed to life, casting that harsh white glow over everything. The water in the pool was perfectly smooth like glass. I started with the boys' locker room. It smelled like mildew and old sneakers, which was pretty standard. I emptied the trash, mopped the floors, and wiped down the benches. The whole time, I could hear the ventilation system humming and the occasional drip of water from the showers. When I finished and came back out to the pool deck, I stopped. Something was different. The water wasn't still anymore. There were ripples moving across the surface, spreading out from the deep end like something had just disturbed it. I stood there, staring at the water, trying to figure out what could have caused it. The building was sealed. No windows were open. No doors had opened or closed. There was no reason for the water to be moving. I told myself it was probably just the filtration system kicking on, even though I'd never seen it create ripples like that before. I grabbed my mop and started cleaning the deck, keeping my eyes on the water. The ripples stopped after about 30 seconds, and the surface went smooth again. I continued working, pushing the mop around the perimeter of the pool. I just reached the diving board area when I heard it. A splash. Not a big splash like something heavy falling in. More like the sound of someone dipping their hand in the water and pulling it back out. A soft, deliberate splash. I froze, mop in hand, and looked at the pool. The water was moving again. More ripples, spreading from a spot about 10 feet from where I was standing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. No answer. I walked slowly around the edge of the pool, shining my flashlight across the water. The pool was lit from underwater lights so I could see all the way to the bottom. There was nothing there. No leaves, no debris, nothing that could have caused a splash. I stood at the spot where the ripples had originated and looked down into the clear blue water. 8 feet deep in this section. I could see every tile on the bottom. Then I saw movement. Not in the water, in the reflection on the surface. Behind me, a dark shape, human-sized, standing at the edge of the pool about 15 feet away. My heart jumped into my throat. I spun around, flashlight up. Nobody there. The pool deck was empty. Just bleachers, lane dividers hanging on the wall, and the lifeguard stand in the corner. I looked back at the water. The reflection was gone. I tried to rationalize it. The lights, the shadows, the angle, any of those could have created an illusion. I was tired. I'd been working for 5 hours already. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I finished mopping as quickly as I could, my heart rate elevated, my senses on high alert. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the lights, the distant rumble of the HVAC system, the drip 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 from the showers in the locker room. I moved to the bleachers to wipe them down. They were retractable, pushed back against the wall when not in use. I had to climb up to the 3rd level to reach the back benches where kids left their water bottles and forgotten towels. As I was wiping down the top bench, I heard footsteps on the pool deck. Wet footsteps. That distinct slapping sound of bare feet on tile, leaving wet prints behind. I stopped breathing. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking along the edge of the pool and their feet were wet. I turned slowly, looking down at the deck from my position on the bleachers. Nobody there. But the footsteps continued. I could hear them clearly, moving from the shallow end toward the deep end, walking the perimeter of the pool. Slap, slap, slap. I climbed down from the bleachers as fast as I could, my hands shaking. The footsteps stopped the moment my feet touched the ground. I stood completely still, listening. The only sound was my own breathing and the ambient hum of the building. I walked to where I'd heard the footsteps. The deck was completely dry. No wet footprints. No water. Nothing. I was done. I grabbed my cleaning cart and pushed it toward the exit, not bothering to finish the bleachers. I could come back Friday night and finish. I wasn't staying in that building another minute. As I reached the door, I heard one more sound. A voice. Faint, echoing, coming from somewhere near the deep end. Help. Just one word. Spoken quietly, like someone calling from far away. I didn't look back. I pushed through the door and let it slam shut behind me, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my skull. I went straight to the main office and called my supervisor. Told him I thought someone might be in the auditorium, maybe a student who'd hidden after hours. He said he'd come check it out. He arrived 20 minutes later. We went back to the pool together. He walked the entire deck, checked both locker rooms, even looked in the equipment closet. Nothing. Nobody. You sure you heard something? He asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He gave me this look, not quite believing me but not dismissing it either. Old buildings make sounds, he said finally. Especially around water. Acoustics get weird. I didn't argue. But I knew what I'd heard. And I knew what I'd seen in that reflection. The next morning, before my shift ended, I looked up the school's history in the library. Found some old newspaper articles on microfiche. In 1987, a student had drowned in that pool during an after-school practice. The article said the coach had left the room briefly, and when he came back, the student was at the bottom of the deep end. They tried to revive him, but he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The student's name was Marcus Webb. He was 11 years old. I kept working at the school for another 2 years after that, but I never cleaned the auditorium alone again. I'd wait until Friday when another custodian was working and we'd do it together. Even with someone else there, I could feel it. That presence in the water. Watching from the deep end. Waiting. Sometimes on quiet nights, I'd walk past the viewing window in the hallway and look in at the dark pool. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, I'd see ripples moving across the surface. Even though the filtration system was off. Even though the building was sealed. Even though nobody was there. The water was never really still. Story 2, the art room. I worked as a night custodian at a high school for 4 years, and for the most part it was a good job. The building was newer than some I'd worked in, the pay was decent, and the routine was straightforward. I had a partner, a guy named Raymond who'd been doing custodial work for 20 years, and we split the building between us. I took the west wing and he took the east, and we'd meet up around 2 a.m. in the cafeteria for our lunch break. The west wing had most of the creative arts classrooms. Music rooms, drama room, and the art studios. 3 of them actually, Art 1, Art 2, and the advanced studio that had the pottery wheels and kilns. I liked the art rooms during the day. They had natural light from big windows and they smelled like paint and clay. Kids' artwork covered the walls, paintings, drawings, sculptures. It felt alive in a good way. But at night, those rooms took on a different quality. All that artwork staring back at you in the dim light. Eyes and portraits following you as you moved. Shadows from the pottery wheels and easels creating strange shapes on the walls. The advanced studio was the worst. It was at the very end of the west wing, isolated from the other classrooms. The teacher, Mrs. Cassidy, was particular about her space. She'd left a note in the custodial office specifically requesting that we be careful in her room. Don't move the student work. Don't touch the pieces in the kiln. Don't disturb anything on the work tables. I tried to respect her wishes, but it made cleaning difficult. The room was always cluttered with projects in various states of completion. Half-finished clay sculptures. Paintings drying on racks. Sketches pinned to boards. One Thursday night in January, I was working through my route when I reached the advanced studio. It was around 11:30 p.m. I unlocked the door and flipped on the lights. The room looked different. All the artwork, every painting, every sketch, every piece of student work that had been displayed on the walls, was turned around, facing backward. like someone had gone through and deliberately flipped each piece so you couldn't see the image anymore. I stood in the doorway staring. There had to be 50 or 60 pieces in that room. Turning them all around would have taken someone significant time and effort. My first thought was vandalism. Maybe some students had broken in after school. But the door had been locked, and nothing else seemed disturbed. Just the artwork all turned backward. I walked into the room slowly, looking around. The pottery wheels were in their normal positions. The kilns were closed. The work tables had the usual clutter of tools and materials. I turned one of the paintings back around. It was a portrait of a girl, done in watercolor. Pretty good, actually. I turned another one, an abstract landscape. As I was reaching for a third piece, I heard a sound from the back of the room. A scraping sound like something being dragged across the floor. I froze, my hand halfway to the painting. The sound came from behind the partition that separated the workspace from the kiln area. "Hello?" I called out. "Someone in here?" No answer. I grabbed a broom from my cart, more for comfort than anything else, and walked slowly toward the partition. The overhead lights only illuminated about 3/4 of the room. The kiln area in back was dimmer, lit by a single bulb. I rounded the partition and stopped. One of the pottery wheels was spinning. Slowly, deliberately, even though it wasn't turned on. The wheel was rotating on its own, making a low grinding sound as it moved. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Pottery wheels don't spin by themselves. They have to be powered on. They have to have someone's foot on the pedal. The wheel continued its slow rotation. 3 seconds per revolution. Perfectly steady. I walked over to it and put my hand out to stop it. The moment my fingers touched the wheel, it jerked to a stop so suddenly that it threw me off balance. And in that instant of silence that followed, I heard breathing. Not my own. Someone else's. Close enough that I could hear the intake and exhale clearly. Right behind me. I spun around, broom raised. Nobody there. Just the empty room. The kilns. The shelves of clay and glazes. The art supplies stacked in boxes. But the breathing continued. Steady. Rhythmic. Like someone standing perfectly still, just out of sight. I backed up toward the partition, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. The breathing followed me, staying at the same distance, always just behind my shoulder. I made it to the partition and practically ran back to the main area of the studio. The breathing stopped the moment I crossed that threshold. I stood there, chest heaving, staring back at the kiln area. Nothing moved. No sounds. I should have left right then. Should have locked the door and reported it to Raymond or my supervisor. But I needed to finish my work. I had a routine to maintain. And maybe, some stubborn part of me insisted, there was a rational explanation. I turned my attention back to the artwork on the walls. Started flipping pieces back to their proper position. Portrait. Landscape. Still life. Abstract. I turned about 10 pieces back around when I noticed something. One of the portraits was different. It was a charcoal drawing of a man's face. Middle-aged, harsh features, intense eyes. The detail was remarkable. You could see every line and shadow. But I didn't remember seeing this piece before. I stepped closer to examine it. The drawing was tacked to the wall with pushpins, same as the others. But the paper looked older. Yellowed slightly. The charcoal was smudged in places like it had been handled a lot. And the face, there was something unsettling about it. The eyes seemed to follow you. The expression was angry. Almost accusing. I reached up to turn it around like the others, and as my fingers touched the corner of the paper, I felt it. The paper was warm. Not room temperature. Actually warm, like someone had just been holding it. I jerked my hand back. Behind me, I heard the pottery wheel start spinning again. I didn't look. I just grabbed my cart and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, every single piece of artwork fell off the wall simultaneously. Not one or two. All of them. In perfect unison. They hit the floor with a sound like a single massive thump. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, my heart trying to beat out of my chest. The door slammed shut behind me on its own. I stood in the empty hallway, listening to my ragged breathing echo off the lockers. Raymond found me there 10 minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Something's wrong with the art room," I managed to say. We went back together. When he unlocked the door and we stepped inside, everything was normal. The artwork was hanging properly on the walls. The pottery wheel was still. No sounds, no movement, nothing out of place. "What happened?" Raymond asked. I couldn't explain it. The artwork falling, the pottery wheel spinning, the breathing, none of it made sense. I sounded crazy even to myself. Raymond gave me this sympathetic look. Long shifts mess with your head sometimes. Why don't you take your break early? I didn't argue. The next night, I asked Raymond to switch wings with me. Told him I wanted a change of pace. He agreed without asking why. I never cleaned that art room alone again. About a month later, I was having lunch in the cafeteria with Raymond when he mentioned something casually. "That art room you didn't like?" Mrs. Cassidy asked me about it today. What about it? She wanted to know if we'd been moving stuff around. Said some of her students' work keeps getting turned backward on the walls. Happens almost every night. I felt a chill run down my spine. What did you tell her? Told her we don't touch the artwork, per her instructions. He took a bite of his sandwich, then added, she seemed frustrated. Said it's been happening for years. Different custodians, same problem. Did she say anything else? Yeah. She mentioned that back in the 90s, the art teacher before her, a guy named something or other, had some kind of breakdown. Had to be escorted out by police. They found him in that room after hours, destroying student work. Tearing paintings off the walls, smashing sculptures. Raymond shrugged. Apparently, he developed some paranoid delusion that the students were mocking him through their art. That they were putting hidden messages in their work. Mrs. Cassidy said the guy went into a psychiatric facility and never came out. When did this happen? I don't know. 25, 30 years ago? Why? I thought about the charcoal portrait. The angry face with accusing eyes. The warm paper. The spinning pottery wheel. No reason, I said. But I knew. And I think Raymond knew that I knew. Some people leave an impression on a place. Especially if they leave it angry. Especially if they leave it unwillingly. The advanced studio still has problems. Mrs. Cassidy still finds her students' work turned backward. The pottery wheels still turn on their own sometimes. And occasionally, a new piece of artwork appears on the wall. A charcoal portrait of a man with harsh features and intense, accusing eyes. Nobody knows who draws it. It's never there during the day. Only at night. Only when the custodians are working alone. Story 3, The Boiler Room. I worked as a custodian at a middle school for almost 8 years, and for most of that time I had the same routine. Start at 10 p.m., work until 6 a.m., go through my checklist floor by floor. The building was old, built in the 1960s, but it was well maintained. Nothing fancy but solid. The kind of place that felt dependable. There was one area I dreaded though. The boiler room. It was in the basement, accessed through a heavy metal door at the bottom of a concrete stairwell. The door was always locked and only a few people had keys. The principal, the maintenance supervisor, and the custodial staff. The boiler room itself was huge, running underneath almost half the building. It was a maze of pipes, ducts, water heaters, electrical panels, and the massive boiler unit itself. Dim lighting, low ceilings in some spots, and a constant rumbling sound from the machinery. I had to go down there twice a week to check the dehumidifiers, empty the drain buckets, and make sure nothing was leaking or overheating. It usually took 15 minutes if nothing was wrong. I hated every second of it. There was something about that space that felt wrong. Not scary exactly, but oppressive. Like the air itself was heavier down there. Sound traveled strangely. Sometimes you'd hear your own footsteps echo back at you with a slight delay, like someone was following just behind you. The older custodian who trained me, a guy named Joe, had warned me about the boiler room on my first day. Don't spend more time down there than you have to, he said. Get in, do your checks, get out. Why? I asked. Something broken? He gave me this look. Just trust me. You'll understand once you've been down there a few times. I didn't understand what he meant for the first few months. The boiler room was unpleasant, sure, but nothing unusual happened. I go down, do my rounds, come back up. No problems. Then one night in late spring, something changed. I was doing my routine check around midnight. I unlocked the metal door and descended the concrete stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The boiler room was its usual self, dim, warm, rumbling with mechanical sounds. I started with the first dehumidifier, emptying the water bucket into the floor drain. As I was working, I heard something over the sound of the machinery. A voice. Faint, but definitely a voice. Calling from somewhere deeper in the basement. I straightened up, listening hard. The boiler's rumble made it difficult to hear clearly, but there it was again. Hello? My stomach tightened. Nobody should be down there. The door was locked. I was the only one with access at this hour. Hello? I called back. Someone down here? No response. Just the mechanical hum. I grabbed my flashlight and moved deeper into the basement, past the main boiler unit into the section where the older pipes ran. This area was rarely used anymore. Everything was shut off and abandoned when they'd upgraded the heating system 10 years ago. As I walked, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I heard it again. "Help me." My blood ran cold. The voice was clearer now. A man's voice, strained and desperate. "Where are you?" I called out, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Back here. I'm stuck." I followed the voice, moving through the narrow passages between pipes. The ceiling was lower here, maybe 6 feet high, and I had to duck under some of the ductwork. The voice kept calling. "Help. Please. I can't move." I reached a section I'd never been in before, a dead end where the old pipes terminated at the foundation wall. My flashlight swept across the space. Nobody there. "Where are you?" I called again. "Right here. Behind the wall." I pressed my hand against the concrete foundation. Solid. No openings, no gaps, no way anyone could be behind it. And then I realized, the voice wasn't coming from this room. It was coming through the wall. From the other side. From somewhere that shouldn't exist. The building plans showed nothing beyond this wall. Just earth. The foundation. "I can't help you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's no way to get to you. Please. It's so dark. It's been so long." I backed away slowly, my flashlight still aimed at the wall. As I retreated, the voice got quieter but didn't stop. "Don't leave me here. Please. Don't leave me." I turned and half ran back through the maze of pipes, past the boiler, up the concrete stairs. I didn't stop until I was back in the main hallway with the metal door shut and locked behind me. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to rationalize what I just heard. Sound carries strangely in basements. Pipes and ducts can create acoustic anomalies. Maybe someone was outside the building and their voice had somehow traveled through the ventilation system. But I knew none of those explanations fit. That voice had been clear. Desperate. Coming from inside the wall. I didn't go back to the boiler room for 2 weeks. I logged false entries in my checklist, marking the dehumidifiers as checked when I hadn't been near them. Finally, my supervisor noticed and asked why I was avoiding the basement. I told him everything. The voice, the location, the impossibility of it. He listened without interrupting, then said, "You heard about the maintenance worker?" "What maintenance worker?" "Before my time, but I heard the story when I started here. Early 70s, I think. They were doing renovations, expanding the boiler room. A maintenance worker named Don something, I don't remember his last name, went down to check on the construction at the end of his shift. Never came back up." My mouth went dry. "What happened to him?" "They found him 3 days later. Trapped in a collapse. The contractors had been removing some old support beams, and a section of the wall gave way. Buried him under concrete and rubble." Did he die right away?" The supervisor shook his head. "Coroner said he'd been alive for at least a day, maybe longer. They could tell by." He trailed off. "It wasn't quick." I felt sick. "Where did this happen?" "Back in the old section. They sealed it off after the accident. Too unstable to repair, too expensive to excavate properly. They just built a new wall and left the old area behind it." That's when I understood. The voice I'd heard wasn't coming through the wall. It was coming from inside it. From the sealed-off section where a man had died slowly, alone in the dark, calling for help that never came. I quit 2 weeks later. Told my supervisor I was taking a better job out of state, which wasn't true. I just couldn't work in that building anymore. Couldn't walk past that basement door without remembering the voice. "Don't leave me here." Sometimes I think about that maintenance worker. About those last hours, trapped in the dark, knowing nobody could hear him. Knowing he was going to die down there. And I think about how his voice is still there. Still calling. Still hoping that someone eventually will help him. But there's no way to reach him. The wall is solid concrete now. The old section has been sealed for 50 years. Whatever's behind that wall, whether it's actual remains or just an echo, an imprint of desperation and fear, it's permanent. Before I left, I tried to find information about the accident. Searched through old newspapers, school records, anything. Found almost nothing. Just a brief mention in a local paper from 1972. Maintenance worker killed in construction accident at middle school. Name withheld pending family notification. No follow-up articles. No name. No details. Like the whole thing had been quietly covered up and forgotten. Except by the building itself. The new custodian who took my position lasted 3 months. He quit suddenly, no explanation given. The one after him lasted 6 weeks. I heard through mutual connections that they kept hearing the same thing. A voice in the boiler room. Calling from inside the wall. "Help me. Please. Don't leave me here." I don't work as a custodian anymore. I got a day job in an office building. Regular hours. Lots of people around. Fluorescent lights in cubicles and the sound of normal conversation. But sometimes, late at night when I'm home alone and the house is quiet, I think I can still hear it. That voice, faint and desperate, echoing from somewhere far away. Still calling. Still trapped. Still hoping. And I think about all the people who've walked past that basement door over the last 50 years. Students, teachers, staff. Going about their days completely unaware of what's below them. Unaware that someone is still down there in the dark, waiting for help that will never come.